Thank you for taking my call. Before we continue, could you say the first and third digits of your security PIN? Oh, I didn't catch that. Sorry. That's the second and fourth, please. Okay, lovely. All gone through. Did you see what I did there?
It's a scam. Never reveal your full security PIN, even if you think it's your bank calling. Learn how to protect yourself from fraud.
Hello, this is Andrew Pearce with The Daily Show, coming from North London. Coming up, it's the first time in its history, the Chelsea Flower Show, you won't be able to smell a thing. You know why, of course, because it's all being done virtually. Can we live life without risk? An intriguing question posed by our columnist Sarah Vine in the paper today. Isolation and old people, the internet may apparently do us more damage than good. Is the lockdown worth it? I asked that on the day that Rolls-Royce announced 9,000 job losses. But first, a cabinet minister has been the first to admit that the government prioritised the NHS patients over care homes. The Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, today became the first cabinet minister to admit a choice was made to focus on the NHS and hospitals rather than people living in care homes. But was that the right decision? Joining me now to discuss this is the West Lancashire Labour MP Rosie Cooper. Rosie Cooper, the Justice Secretary, Robert Buckland, has he let the cat out of the bag? Because he said today, for the first time, yes, we prioritise the NHS over people in care homes, because he said they didn't want to have a position where the NHS was overwhelmed. Were they right to prioritise it, or should they have prioritised both sets, the NHS and care homes?
I think strategically, had they appreciated what they were doing, they would have dealt with both equally. But what we're really seeing is that social care is the junior partner in the way we look after people, especially the old. So really, we do need to have a real Department of Health and Social Care all joined up together. It's quite often said that anybody shouldn't spend time in hospital longer than they need to because of infection, and that is quite right. So getting them home is quite right as well. The problem is if you haven't tested the patients and you're sending them back to an under-resourced residential or nursing home where they didn't have the correct PPE, isolation and the methods of caring for them wasn't sorted out, and also the fact that you've got a lot of agency staff moving from home to home. I think it was a tragedy waiting to happen, and sadly, it's happened.
Boris Johnson at Prime's Question Time today, I don't know if you heard any of it, he said that the decisions to move people out of homes and to go to care homes, clinicians were involved in that decision. Now, I wasn't sure if that was the Prime Minister trying to say, don't blame us ministers because it was done at a clinician level, or whether he was saying that the clinicians were the ones who failed to ensure tests were carried out first on some of the people who were showing the virus symptoms.
I really genuinely don't like all this trying to pass the parcel blame all round, because the truth is you couldn't get people out of hospital safely if you didn't have the tests. And frankly, we didn't have the tests operationally then. And one of the government scientists was quite clear, really, the other day when they said that the decisions and the advice given was based on the capacity we had. So people took risks, and they took risks with old people's lives, and that is just awful.
The government argue, of course, that things are improving now. Should we be talking still about the mistakes that were made then, or looking forward, Rosie Cooper, to the way things are improving? They're talking about possibly a vaccine, they're talking about the antibody tests, because a lot of people I know that I talk to say they are ground down by the depressing nature of this virus, and they need something to latch onto, to be optimistic about.
Absolutely. Well, I can understand that. The problem is, by not being honest, transparent and realistic right now about where we are, means that hope, that wish, that belief in a vaccine or some sort of test that will really enable us to get a grip of this diminishes because you don't trust the noises and numbers coming out that we hear every day. So yes, of course it's depressing, because what people are saying, and I'm not having a go in the sense that we said we'd get, I don't care how many tests we do, as long as we're testing properly. Right now, we seem to be chasing 100,000 tests, 200,000 tests. Are we testing the right people? Are we actually getting to the people who are infected? I mean, I'll give you very frankly some instances now. And I think the problem comes back to that people who are great at the theory are not great operationally. So it's all right saying we need 100,000 tests. This is how we do it. If you then go and give the contract to Deloitte and you have testing stations, for example, here around Merseyside and Lancashire, where I live and my constituency is, you've got a testing station at Manchester Airport, miles out. You've got a testing station at Haydock Racecourse. So, for example, people in Liverpool will be faced with either a 50-mile round trip or a 100-mile round trip. So that's not going to happen. But then, when people do get there and get their tests, I can give absolute assurance to you now that my inbox is flooded with people who've had results which are, quotes, unclear. And unclear translates to lost. So they've had the test done. And in one particular case, a lady had a test done. It was unclear. She was asked to do a second test. Within 48 hours, she got 3 results. The first being positive. Within hours, a second letter saying that it was negative, and then positive again. Her family told me that she decided, as her husband's now, she's got symptoms and her husband now is positive, that she'd stop the hokey cokey and she'd just behave as if she was positive. It's those kinds of stories that we all know. What the government really needs to do is to look forward and, yes, let's get the vaccine, let's do whatever. But let's underpin that with honesty and trust where we are now. Not all decisions have been right. Not all decisions have been wrong. But we actually need to figure out where we're up to, be honest, let's get on with it. Having all this nonsense about 100,000, 200,000, we can't find the test, we can't get the... How does that give anybody any level of assurance? I want everyone to stop posturing, just tell the truth. We're all in this together. If we don't get the right answers, we're all at risk. So I want us to work together, all of us, to get the right answer. And this nonsense just isn't it.
If I could ask you just finally, Rosie Cooper, I agree with what you've just said there. Just finally and briefly, what is the view of your local authority in West Lancashire about children going back to school on June the 1st? Are they for it or against it?
They are actually, well, a phenomenal number of schools will take those decisions independently. So
right.
They will work with schools to make sure that we get the safest situation for children. I don't think it's clear all round how local authorities are going to deal with it. And they've also got a problem in that I listen into their strategic forum every Monday afternoon, and they can't get a grasp because government won't let them get the information on test results, on access to the central database. So they can't deal with it locally. So either we're going to do it nationally and get it right and make all the decisions nationally, or we're going to actually work with local public health doctors. Let's try and do it together. Let's try and get the best for each area. Not all areas are the same. Not everyone's right. Not everyone's wrong. Can we try and do it together?
What a good idea. That's Rosie Cooper. She's the Labour MP for West Lancashire, and a voice, if I may say, a voice of common sense. Remember to tell your Alexa speaker to play Daily Mail News, and you'll get the latest newsroom live from Mail Plus. And at 5, you get to hear the latest Daily Show. Unemployment in Britain has surged to 1.3 million in the first 3 months of 2020. It's the economic impact of the coronavirus. Today, Rolls-Royce has announced 9,000 job losses, mainly at its plant in Derby. As the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, warns there may not be any immediate economic bounce back once the worst of the virus is over. Joining me now is the Mail on Sunday's irrepressible columnist, Peter Hitchens. Peter, you've argued before the lockdown is too severe, the medicine too severe, the economy is getting worse by the day. You'll have heard today Rolls-Royce are axing 9,000 jobs, mainly in Derby. Have they got to lift the lockdown a lot sooner?
First of all, I object to the term lockdown, a horrible expression to describe the punishment of convicts in an American penitentiary. We're free people in a free country. We shouldn't allow this term to be used of us. Secondly, I thought from the beginning that the strangling of the economy and the imposition of house arrest were wholly disproportionate to the problem we faced. When I hear of thousands of people being made redundant, I try to think of each of these individuals. 1,000 is a statistic. An individual is a number of people who have worked for many years, who've obtained skills, who've supported their families, who've taken out mortgages, who've built lives, and who now find that everything on which this was based is being taken away from them. And it makes me both very angry and very distressed. And it particularly so because it was an avoidable action of a deliberate government policy which should never have been followed.
Do you think it was the mentality of the sheep? Other countries have done it, we must too, or because they genuinely believe this is the way to try to stop the spread of the virus, which, by the way, it appears they've not achieved in doing?
Well, I've no doubt they sincerely believed that what they were doing was right, but then incompetent and easily gullible people often do think that what they're doing is right. The problem is these people have got positions of immense responsibility, and on this occasion they had probably the greatest responsibility of their lives, and indeed the greatest responsibility anybody's probably exercised outside wartime in modern history, and they took, in my view, a gravely wrong decision. It seems odd that people should spend so much time and effort obtaining office, and then when they get it, be so incapable of exercising it in a responsible fashion. I think that when we have calmed down about this and understood that we engaged in an episode of a spasm of mass hysteria, and when we look back on this in 2 years' time from the ruins of our economy and the ruins of our liberty as well, that we will want very much to see some sort of, how shall I put it, some justice. Those who took this wrong decision should in some ways pay some sort of penalty for what they've done.
Well, how do they do that?
But at the moment, my main concern is to bring it to an end as quickly as possible. And
I get that.
To do that, I think that everybody involved in creating this nonsense should admit that they were mistaken. And the absurdities which are now being imposed, the ridiculous, actually scientifically baseless 2-yard gap we're supposed to maintain between each other, the wearing of muzzles in the street, the absurd provisions that would have to exist in schools if ever they could be opened, the nonsensical discouragement of people from using public transport. All these things are, and indeed the reluctance of many of the unions and the teachers to reopen the schools, are all the result of the government deliberately spreading fear. And that fear has taken root in a quite frightening way. And people who one thought were rational behave as if they're in the Middle Ages confronted with the Black Death. And there is a truly irrational fear loose in our country at the moment. And the only way in which this could be brought to an end would be if those who began it would admit that they made a terrible mistake. This is exactly the case of the Sorcerer's Apprentice, as rather beautifully summed up in the Disney film Fantasia. The apprentice thinks that he will save himself a lot of trouble if he casts a spell to get these automatons to carry water for him, but the problem is he doesn't have any way of stopping them. And this government, in the same way, has sought to achieve an end by creating a great deal of fear, and now has no way of dispelling the fear which it created.
They would argue, if they were in a studio with you, Peter Hitchens, they aren't talking about government ministers, and let's not forget Labour opposition MPs have argued that the government took us into, I appreciate you don't like the word lockdown, closed down the economy too late, but they would argue they've been following the science.
Well, they could argue they've been following some science, but the thing about science is that any real science is about investigation and ultimately about disagreement. And there is, in epidemiology, as in many other areas science, considerable disagreement, and there were other opinions which they could have listened to. They chose, it seems to me, without any serious consideration, to listen to one particular argument to follow it. I would love to be in a position to actually argue with these people in a television studio, but the fact is that the British Broadcasting Corporation has become the government broadcaster during this period, and has treated any kind of dissent from the basic message that we are threatened by the worst plague since the 1918 influenza pandemic. Any dissent from this is treated as illegitimate and is given no platform. So there is absolutely no opportunity for people such as me to do this. I would love to see, for instance, Lord Sumption, the former Supreme Court judge, who takes a very similar position to mine, in the same television studio as any of the ministers involved in this. And I don't have the slightest doubt that his logic and knowledge would cut them to ribbons in a matter of minutes. But they are not exposed. Because the only true forum for debate in the country in its current state would be broadcast. They're not exposed to this, so it doesn't happen. And you rightly point out the role of the Labour Party, which has not been in opposition. We have a plastic dummy parliament, which confronted with the shocking coronavirus bill back at the beginning, this voted for its extremely radical provisions without so much as a division. There was no opposition, and there's been an absence of opposition, except ludicrously from people like me. I don't see why it should have fallen to me, but there it is. Here I am. I'll continue to do it. And as I say, if you include in that opposition people such as Lord Sumption, you realise that it isn't just me. It's other people who also see the absurdity of what's going on. But when you see thousands of people having their livelihoods destroyed in a great industry, one of the very few major industries in which this country is still a world leader, these people being chucked out onto the stones after years and years of work in the middle of trying to support families and pay for their homes, I just find it so appalling.
Just finally, Peter Hitchens, you wrote very powerfully about this in your Mail on Sunday column. I don't know if it was last Sunday or the Sunday before. I imagine your post bag is always pretty big and bulging. Did you get more letters than normal?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I do get a reasonable amount, but people these days, in the days of Twitter and the blog that I run, people have learned to contact me in other ways.
Online.
Yeah, I mean, I do. Apart from the office is largely closed, and it's taken some time to catch up as well with the physical correspondence. So I do try to do it. No, I think that the online response has been more vigorous because it's, apart from anything else, that's apart from the Mail on Sunday, that's been the place where I've been most able to make my point. And also I have been having a regular, almost regular slot on Talk Radio each Monday morning with Mike Graham, where he's but with great generosity of spirit, because he disagrees with me, has had me on every week at 11 in the morning to try and discuss this in a rational fashion, and that's also got me quite a lot of response. But no, I think, in fact, because fear is such a powerful emotion, and because people are afraid, I think, in fact, I'm still speaking. I don't claim to be speaking for a majority. I'm still speaking for a growing minority of people who begin to realise that we have been grievously misled on this. But it's taking quite a while for that to sink in. And in fact, until the furloughing comes to an end and the money finally does run out, and until also the real damage done by this begins to find its way into the prosperous chattering classes, I think, which it will, because the damage to the economy is so profound. Until then, I think, when there will be a great awakening, until then, people like me will remain in a struggling minority.
Well, Peter, you're a very noisy minority and a very articulate minority, and we're very glad you joined us on The Daily Show today. Peter Hitchens, columnist of the Mail on Sunday. Don't miss him. If you enjoy The Daily Show, we'd like you to subscribe to us, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Google or Spotify, and of course you can follow us at Mail Plus. People in their 60s who use the internet every day are more likely to be lonely than those who just surf the web occasionally. This is according to a new study by researchers from Anglia Ruskin University. They looked at online behaviour among adults over 60 using data from 4,500 adults. The study on the link was carried out before coronavirus lockdown measures were introduced. So joining me now is Stephanie Stockwell, who's the lead author of the study at Anglia Ruskin University. Stephanie Stockwell, I get where you're coming from with this research suggesting that older people using the internet are lonelier. But I don't think people in their 50s, particularly, I would be surprised why you've included them in that survey, because most people I know in their 50s are young at heart and out and about all the time, including people like me. who's nearly 60.
Yeah, so we used data from the English longitudinal study of aging, and that uses people who are age 50 plus.
Right. So, I mean, is the loneliness more pronounced if people are in their 80s?
So essentially, there was no association with loneliness and using technology.
Yeah.
But there was associations with social isolation and using technology.
Right. What's the difference?
So loneliness is the subjective sort of how you feel about the connections that you have with people, whereas social isolation is more of the objective number of connections that you have. Right.
And so this study says that people using the internet over their 50s are more inclined to feel social isolation.
So this study suggests that those who use the internet once a week or once a month are less likely to be socially isolated than people who use it every day.
Right. And why do you think that is?
So this study looks at the associations. So although we can speculate causation, we can't be certain. So one reason could be that people are using technology to try and help reduce their social isolation. Yeah. It could be that less frequent users have quite busy lives and so don't tend to have time to be online more often. But it could also be that using technology more frequently leads to isolation. So it could be a way of kind of shutting off from real world contacts.
So what people just they huddle over their computer screen maybe for hours on end, and then they don't have to pick up the phone and talk to somebody or go out and meet somebody. It's a substitute.
Potential.
Yeah.
Potentially, but as I say, we can't be 100% sure. With this particular study, it would require further investigation.
How many people in Britain do you think only go on the internet once a month?
So
I'm just thinking about my social peer group. I can't think of any.
Very few. Yeah, we're looking at fewer people. There are people who never use it, potentially actively don't go online. They tend to be the older generations. But it's quite encouraging to see that 78% of over 50s are online at least once a week, and actually 69% are on every day.
And do you think that's encouraging?
It could be, because, for instance, there's been a move to try and create online interventions within the NHS. To try and promote sort of positive behaviour changes, whether that was healthy eating, stopping smoking, physical activity. And we can see that older adults are actually online, they're engaging with technology. And so there's potential that we could use technology as a tool to deliver some of these interventions using the technology that older people have in their houses already, which means that it won't cost the individual that much money. That's not to say that we should replace services, etc., face-to-face. I think technology is just a useful tool that we could use in addition to some of these services.
I'm with you. And just finally, I wonder, amongst your peer group, you're a much younger person than me, Stephanie, you guys are on the internet how many hours a day as opposed to a month?
Well, that is a population that I personally don't work with, but from a personal point of view, people who are at work, for instance, we're online a lot, potentially may have implications. We can see that there were no associations with frequency of being online with loneliness in older adults, but I don't know how that might affect younger generations.
Another study coming up for you, Stephanie. Why not? All right,
maybe.
That's fascinating stuff. That's Stephanie Stockwell. She's the lead author of this research, and she's from Anglia Ruskin University. Now, is it possible to eliminate all risks from our daily lives? Of course not. And it's a dilemma the nation's teachers now face. Vulnerable children from poor backgrounds, they need to go back to school. But is it worth the health risk to teachers, according to the unions? Sarah Vine answered that question in her column today, and she joins me now. It is impossible, isn't it, Sarah, to eliminate all risk, especially in the classroom?
Well, it's completely impossible in life to eliminate all risk. And I mean, as I argue today, a lot of the greatest inventions of mankind have come about because people have taken a risk. If Rosa Parks hadn't sat down on that bus and refused to move and risked life and limb, we wouldn't have had the civil rights movement. Do you know what I mean? So people have to sometimes sometimes you just have to take a risk. And I don't think that the problem with coronavirus is that for some reason we seem to have responded to this as a nation by thinking, right, we're going to eliminate all risk from this thing. No one is going to catch it. And that's just not realistic. Well, I mean, unless you want to spend the next 2 years trapped in your homes and with no economy and no revenue and nothing at all, and just basically mothball the country, that can't happen. So those of us, we have to take calculated risks. We have to, and only we can decide on those things as individuals. I have certain things that probably do make me a slightly higher risk group, but I try to mitigate them as much as I can. And, I get on with my life. And I think that, that's what needs to happen. And especially, as you say, in the context of teachers, the risk of a child, a lot of teachers are very young anyway, and we know that they're very young and not really affected by this. Children don't seem to get it. And if they do, they don't seem to be very symptomatic. And there's also quite a lot of evidence building that, in fact, they don't really transmit it. And so it seems to me that it's actually much less risky for teachers to go back than it is for, say, for example, a supermarket worker to carry on stacking shelves or serving customers, or a nurse or a doctor. I think that in the grand scheme of things, we're not asking them to do anything that's too onerous. I mean, I think if you're an over 50 teacher, if you're a bit older, if you've got underlying issues, then fair enough, you should say, I can't really come to school. But broadly speaking, we need to get the kids back to school, because these are children's lives that are being ruined. I mean, 6 months in the life of a child is the equivalent to about 4 years in the life of an adult.
And that's one risk you can't take, is with a child's education, surely. If they lose months and months, you never get it back.
Exactly. And of course, the irony of the unions being so militant about this is that the children that are going to be disproportionately badly affected by this are the children who need, the poorest and the most deprived in society, because they're the ones for whom school is a proper refuge.
I also heard a teacher on the radio saying, well, we need masks if we're going to go back in the classroom. How can you teach a class of children if you've got a mask on your face?
Well, I mean, we teach classes of children with women in hijabs, so
I suppose.
I don't think.
But I'm not sure we should. I'm not sure we should.
Well, that's a whole other debate. But on the other hand, but that's not that it isn't. It doesn't seem to be a barrier. So I think if people, I mean, if you want to wear a mask, that's fine. Get yourself a mask and wear it. No one's saying that you can't.
What about your own children, Sarah? Are they desperate to get back to school?
Desperate to get back to school. My daughter said to me last night, she said, I can't. She said, anyone who isn't desperate to get back to school, because of course initially they were very excited about the prospect of being on permanent holiday, but in fact what they've realised is that home learning is really hard work, because they have to be self-motivating, and they have to do most of it themselves. And my children are both at very different schools, and one has been very proactive and the other hasn't been quite so proactive. So one of my children has been really struggling, actually. And then the other thing to say is that they miss their friends and they miss their social life, and so much of being a child is about that.
And you can't wait to get them out of the house.
Actually, well, what they've not been too bad. We've sort of rubbed along a bit, but yes, no, I think it'd be nice for them to get out of the house.
All right, that's Sarah.
They keep eating anything.
Are you still doing endless runs to the supermarket?
Oh, endless runs to the supermarket. And they do eat a lot, but I suppose they're little humans, so they need.
They're growing, Sarah. The joys of growing up. That's Sarah Vine. Never miss a column in the Mail on a Wednesday. A must read. Queen and royal family never miss, but this year the Chelsea Flower Show, one of the world's biggest showcases for horticultural excellence, has gone online because of the lockdown. One person who's usually exhibiting at the flower show is Tom Massey, garden designer. But this year, of course, because it's all switched online, that's not happened. He joins me now. Tom, what happened to all that hard work that you'd put in? Because I know you'd put together a pretty awesome exhibit for Yeo Valley.
Yeah, so everything that has been built for the garden, all the features that we'd already made, have just been put in storage, and the hope is that we're going to do it in 2021. So the RHS have already confirmed that anyone who had a place in 2020 will be allowed to do the show in 2021. But with the plants that we'd grown that couldn't be kept or couldn't be saved for next year, the majority of them were donated to hospitals, so to 5 London hospitals and to Derriford Hospital in Plymouth.
Well, that's nice. And what sort of plants and flowers have gone to the hospitals?
All sorts, really. The garden was full of different species, full of organically grown plants designed to attract a range of different animals and a range of different pollinators. So, lots of colourful perennials and annuals, lots of different ornamental grasses. And the larger trees and shrubs that we had grown or that we'd procured have been put into storage at the nursery Hortus Loci, who are going to look after them for us until next year. But a small number of the plants as well came to my property in southwest London, and I used them to create a piece for the virtual Chelsea Flower Show.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So what does the piece show?
So in my piece, I'm talking about how to create an organic meadow in your own front garden space. So I've only got a tiny 5 metre by 1 metre front garden, and I show how to create a kind of Chelsea look in your front garden, and how to arrange plants, how to plant for bees and other wildlife, how to attract animals into your garden, and how to create wildlife corridors that benefit animals, particularly bees and other pollinating insects in an urban environment.
And will that be shown? Is that being shown in the online Chelsea Flower Show?
Yeah, so that's being shown online on Friday. It goes out on Friday, and also in the video, it cuts from my garden down to the real Yeo Valley Organic Garden in Somerset, where Sarah Mead, who founded the garden, will talk about her experience gardening organically and how she organises and manages her really beautiful large country garden.
Was it very disappointing that all the work you've done for the Yeo Valley exhibit came to nothing? Not came to nothing, because we've got this lovely online exhibit of your meadow for the show. But was it very disappointing, Tom?
It was obviously disappointing, but I think there's nothing anyone could do really with the coronavirus outbreak. It was, the only decision that could be made was to postpone, cancel or postpone the show. So although it's not happening this year, I think it's really, really good news that the RHS have decided to do virtual Chelsea. And it means that anyone can go as well. You don't have to have a ticket. There's no entry fee. You can just log in online and watch it. So it's open to all.
And I should have asked you, what did your Yeo Valley garden show? Was there a theme?
The theme was organic, so it was all about organic and all about biodiversity, all about attracting wildlife. It showed a range of different habitats, ranging from woodland to wetland to open meadows. So it was a kind of real environmentally friendly garden that was promoting the benefits of organic growing, really.
How many plants and different species would have been in that garden?
Total number of we'd grown about 4,000 perennials. And
wow.
So there were a huge number of different plants and different species were going to be in the garden.
What's your next big project, Tom?
I'm looking forward to Chelsea 2021 now, hopefully.
Of course.
But aside from that, I've got a few really nice residential projects that I'm working on at the moment. So yeah, I've got a few things that are just starting to pick back up again now. The restrictions on construction sites have been lifted a bit, so I'm back on site with a number of projects that have been on pause during lockdown.
Well, that's good to hear. And if we want to catch up with your meadow at the Chelsea Flower Show, how do we find it online? Is there a special address?
It's just, if you log on to the RHS website, there's a page called Virtual Chelsea. I think it's just rhs.co.uk/virtual Chelsea, but you might want to fact check that.
And then we put in Yeo Valley, and your name too, or just Yeo Valley?
So my piece will come out on Friday, and I think it's one piece per day or a couple of pieces per day. So if you log in on Friday, you should be able to see it.
We'll find it, Tom, and we'll look forward to it. Thanks for joining us. That's the garden designer, Tom Massey. So that's all we've got time for today. For the latest from the Daily Mail, come back every day for briefings at 7 a.m, 12 noon, and of course 5 p.m, where you can listen to me all over again. I'm Andrew Pearce. This is The Daily Show. I'll be back tomorrow. Have yourselves a great evening and good night.